Yes.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us this evening for another series of the economics of education. And we had a great time. Last time we spoke, we talked about the National Closing Day, Decision Day rather, and where students around the nation are engaged with multiple applications, acceptance letters, and have to make a decision on which school they were going to go to. And it was a lively engagement. So, again, I want to thank you all for participating and showing up. And it was so successful, I wanted to do another talk. And so today we are talking about Close the Gap, the scholarships talk. And a lot of times, I've been a financial aid professional for over 25 years. And, part of my responsibility is helping students and parents navigate the financial aid office at various colleges and having conversation with them about, that gap part once the aid has been applied as far as what the school is going to offer them, and they're still like, wait a minute, I still owe a few $1,000s, and how can I take care of that? And generally, for some families they have savings like a traditional 529 plan, um, and or they look at other opportunities. So one of the opportunities that they may look at, and which I strongly recommend, is outside external, what we call external scholarships. And so you can go to the next slide, Iris. So that's generally kind of the opportunity people tend not to think about because it requires work. It requires folks spending some time and looking at the various opportunities that are available to them. And so, what I hope to get accomplished in this tonight's series is kind of talk about some tips and shortcuts on, well, there's really no shortcuts, but how to navigate the scholarship mind. Because a lot of times families think, oh, there's this kind of pot of gold sitting out there, and they are usually thinking, oh, if it was that easy, then they would have it. And if it was, one, I wouldn't need to do this series and you wouldn't need to be here. So, what I want to talk about is kind of the types of scholarships that are out there, the take action that you need. We're going to talk about some national scholarships that are out there, and what we mean by national scholarship, and then actually looking for scholarships. So, we can go to the next slide. So, as we know, college is not cheap. It is very expensive. And this is kind of give you some overviews of what cost is in the various types of schools, public out of state, and private. These are averages. So obviously there are schools that cost a lot more above these, and there are some schools that may be a lower cost than what you see here. Community colleges tend to be a little cheaper in their tuition, whereas private schools, we're talking elite schools, where if you're in the New York City area, we're talking like the NYUs, the Columbias, the Cornells, tend to have a much higher sticker price. And so these are kind of what the average undergrad programs cost within the nation. You can go to the next slide. Yes. And so, you know, our dream is to pursue a higher education. For the parents that are here, it is your dream to see your child go through college. And for the students here, this is something that you wanted to do. Some of you really desire wanted to do. Some of you had no choice about going. But it's at the end of the day, there's a cost factor. In this current political climate that we're in, higher education has been one of the major conversations in the political circle. When if under the Democratic Party, We had candidates like Senator Warren and Senator Bernie who were talking about free tuition in the public school systems. And we had Senator Warren talking about debt free because, you know, the alarming numbers of debt, as you can see in the borrowing section, is constantly increasing. So what we're going to talk about today is mainly the blue section, the grants and scholarships, which you can see typically is 31% of families use that to cover the cost of attendance. Iris, you can go to the next slide. So a lot of times when people ask me, they're like, hey, LaVerne, you know, what kind of scholarships are out there? You know, what do I do? And there are literally a scholarship for anything and everything. And so this infographic kind of gives you a nice overview of the different areas and the types of scholarships that there are out there. There are scholarships based on academics, background. Background could be your culture, your ethnicity, family name, you know, religion. Some of you may belong to a faith-based organization, and I know to my producer, Iris, you know, goes to House of the Lord Church, and they have a scholarship, an annual scholarship drive, and it's called the Randolph Evans Scholarship. And it is based on a young man who was tragically killed almost 40 something years ago. And the scholarship is a local scholarship, what we call, and it, you know, is given to any student who's able to write an essay about how this impact of this injustice does. So you may belong to a faith-based organization like that has its own scholarship initiative. And so that's a faith-based type of scholarship that you will look at. Another common scholarship is what we call activity scholarships. If you've done some kind of leadership work, volunteer work, community service, those are generally common. So if you've been working at maybe a local nonprofit organization in your community, and in exchange of your hours and service that you've given them, they offer you a scholarship, maybe a one-time scholarship or a recurring scholarship. And we'll talk a little more about that. And then the big one, I would say, is what we call financial need. So the family have to demonstrate some type of need. And so if it meets whatever that criteria of that particular scholarship, then you may be eligible to get what we call a grant in that space. So these are the various areas of where scholarships come from. Again, this doesn't even speak to the entirety of it, but it gives you a nice overview of where scholarships are usually categorized. You can go to the next slide. So the key thing about scholarship, there is no magic to it. There's no quick fix to it. The key thing is about being organized, starting early, apply to as many as possible, and follow the instructions. Here's where people miss the mark. They tend to miss the deadline. They tend to self-select which ones they think they apply to. And then they also miss the clear instructions. So I'll give you an example. An example of, give me one moment. Okay. An example of where people miss the mark. The easiest one is deadline date. Deadline dates are there. They have obviously a specific reason for being there, because decisions need to be made. The organizers need to review the applications that come in, and therefore make a decision in a timely manner so that they can get back to all the applicants to let them know if they've either been accepted or rejected. And so those deadlines are key. And so you want to pay attention to them. And so even if you miss the deadline on a particular scholarship, and we'll talk later about what we call a scholarship organizer, that's okay. You're going to make a note of it and then apply this next year if you can. The other thing is apply with many. Again, what tends to happen, we tend to look for these big bang types of scholarships that's going to promise you thousands and tens of thousands of dollars. And my thing is apply for everything. Do not self-select yourself out. What tends to happen is students and parents, they're like, oh, that amount is too small. Oh, or they would say something like the scholarships will have, all scholarships have a criteria. And so they may list what those criteria are. And so give you a quick story. So when I worked at Cornell, and at my time there was a scholarship that was earmarked for students of a specific ethnicity who came in a lower economic background. And so as I looked along the list of students, I could not find a student who, what was the story? The story was that the students that were listed did not meet the economic threshold that the scholarship requirement asked for. They had the ethnicity, but not the income level. So I immediately called my development team and said, hey, I don't have a student this year. So they said, well, LaVerne, we have to spend this money. I said, oh no. So I went back to the drawing board, looked at the list, and fortunately, creatively, managed to make it work because I searched on the origin of a student's name. And based on the student's origin and name, and she met the economic threshold, I was able to award her a $40,000 scholarship for the 4 years of her medical school experience. So what I say to that is that had she not put her name on the list, even though she may have not met the criteria ethically because she didn't identify herself as such, she would have missed out on this opportunity because I creatively, as the committee, made it work because she came as close to what the donor had wanted. So I say that to say is that when you read this feedback, when you read the requirements, you don't necessarily say, man, I don't have number 4 and don't submit the application. So that's what I mean. Be diverse in your application pool, put everything out there and see what happens. The third thing is follow the instructions. A lot of times I reject for scholarships because folks just don't follow the simple instructions. And when I have hundreds and thousands of applications to review, the last thing my first process is screening them. So I'm going through them and I'm looking for all of the things that I needed to have. And then there's the secondary path. So a lot of times it's because the students just miss key instructions that are there. So follow the instructions. They're there for a reason. And, and just pay attention to those details. We can go to the next slide. A common financial aid scholarship application is the FAFSA. I probably will have, each time I do a talk, I probably will have this slide here because this slide is such a crucial infographic because a lot of times families truly leave money on the table because they don't want to be bothered with the FAFSA application. This is the free application for federal student aid. It is your pathway into federal resources. You may not be eligible for certain federal grants like a Pell Grant, but you may be eligible for other federal programs that is offered by the Department of Ed, and they use this application at times as your entry point to sharing that information with you. And so for my parents who've gone to college and gone through the financial aid process, it hasn't changed in 20 something years. They may have, changed some of the questions, but overall it's the same kind of multi-page application. They now have moved it to a mobile app. so that it's hopefully students and families can easily navigate through it. I personally don't know what it looks like yet. I've not had feedback from anyone who's known them used it. It's accessible online. You go to fasa.ed.gov and just take your time to go through it. But the key thing I bring it up is because of the importance to other federal programs that may be available to you, but you won't know that unless you put your name on the list and in the database. We can go to the next slide. So what I wanted to do, and before we get to questions, is to highlight the two types of scholarships. So typically you'll hear interchangeably scholarships and grants. They're both gift aids. They both mean you don't have to pay them back. Typically, grants are associated with demonstrating a need, like need-based, and scholarships are usually associated with meritorious types of opportunities like athleticism, art, music, things of that nature, your test scores. And so the key thing is don't get caught up by the name of it, grant versus scholarship. The key thing is it's a gift aid. You don't have to pay it back. Typically, scholarships applications come out around late winter, early spring, with a due date around March or April. And that's common for most scholarships. However, there would be some that start earlier and start later. So you want to pay attention to that due date. You also want to maintain a scholarship organizer. Something as simple. Iris, I'm going to ask to share the screen if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay. It says hostess Elba's attendance sharing.
Go ahead.
Okay. Here we go. Cool. So something as simple as this. You don't need to spend money to purchase a scholarship organizer. Many of us have access to some kind of spreadsheet application, be it Excel, Google Sheets, if you have Google Sheets. If you on a Mac, like I am, you have something called Numbers. And my suggestion would be is to open up a sheet, give it a heading, name some columns, name amount. These are the key things that you want to track. And so if you have a scholarship that you have, comment on is Jack Cook, and they tend to give $10,000. You put the amount in. It has a due date, let's say July 1, 20. And this tends to be a need-based one. And that information would be outlined in its requirements. And the requirements could be that you are an undergrad student. Here at the end. And I can't spell.
Underguard.
Let's just put, there we go. There we go. And key thing, another thing that's a barrier for many people is they don't want to write essays. Writing is not my forte. Far from it. Our producer, however, is a wonderful writer. I am not. It stresses me out. So my 18-year-old self would have, every time I was looking for a scholarship, if it required me to write, I passed it on. Like, oh, I'm not doing it. So if you're someone in that situation where writing is not necessarily your strength, your strong suit, this is a perfect time to kind of write your template, write your bio now and save it. And so as you come across these various scholarship opportunities, if it requires an essay, all you're doing is editing that essay. And so you're not have to rethink about it every time. You don't have to have heart palpitations about it, because again, that's my story. And so if it does, you're going to say, yes, it does require an essay. And then when you put the application together and you have dot the I's and cross the T's, you have someone look over it, then you hit send and you log it. And so by the time you get before classes start, the fall semester, you should have had responses. And because the other thing you want to add here is received. And so when you get your confirmation letters, you can start tallying up how much money you got. And so you contact your school each time you get your approval letters, and you give it to them, and they can start applying that towards your account. And so if you actively do this, you can have a substantial savings of a few $1,000s, if not tens of thousands of dollars, because the money is out there. And what tends to happen for my seniors, at this point, my seniors, you know, you already probably got your financial aid award letters based on our conversation last week. And you probably said, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to look for anything. I'm satisfied with what I have. My recommendation would be like, don't do that. Continue, use this time, use the remaining part of the spring semester, use your summertime, designate about an hour a week and looking for real dollars. Because if you do that kind of commitment, you're not intentional, I guarantee you will find something that's going to help you close the gap on your tuition and fee bill.
LaVerne, can you speak to scholarships that are for whole 4 years, 2 years, 1 year, semester versus, that's one of the questions related to this. And would you put a column in this spreadsheet that say whether it's for just a period of time or a full scholarship?
Yes. So that's a good question. Thank you. So yeah, some scholarships are kind of one and done. They're just for that year. There are some scholarships that are recurring. So again, in the requirements, in the areas, it will tell you, generally it will tell you under the listing of requirements, what scholarships, what is required of you, and then what that scholarship is going to do. Is it going to give you money every year, every quarter, and things of that nature? And if so, again, you want to make that total here. And so, for example, when I used the scholarship when I worked at Cornell, that was a $40,000 a year scholarship. So in total, the student was getting $120,000. And so there's some kind of communication that's happening with that organization that's letting you know that your application has been renewed. Sometimes they may require you, which is a great question. Thanks, man. Sometimes, because if it's a recurring scholarship, they may need you to submit information that confirms that you're still meeting the criteria. Sometimes it's as simple as that you're still enrolled in the school that you said you were attending. Some of them may be, if it's based on grades, they want to make sure you're maintaining the grade point average that the scholarship requires that you have. If it is a scholarship based on a sport, you may have to continue with that sport. If you decide, like, for example, if it was basketball or jump rope, whatever the heck it could be. Track, yeah. You may say, you know what? I'm done with this track thing. Now, that's a major decision to make, because if that was the scholarship that got you into that program, and then you choose to drop it, the likelihood you're going to forfeit those dollars. And so it's a major conversation you need to have, not only with yourself and your family, but you also need to now tell your school, because now you're going to need to look at alternatives to how to cover that new balance because the scholarship is no longer available to you. So that was a great question. So yes, and I would say on your organizer, you want to create a column that speaks to, is it recurring or is it a one-time? And so again, this is the beauty of spreadsheets. You would just go right in there and insert a thing, if I can get all these silly things out of my hair. So you would just add here for now because too many things are in front of me.
And here's another question related to this as well, on understanding the decision criteria. So I think that relates to the requirements.
Okay.
So the requirements and understanding the decision criteria from the school's perspective, from the college perspective. How are they making the decision? How are they providing the criteria to the students or to those applying, if it's a scholarship from the school?
So scholarships from the school, well, this is what we call institutional aid. So it varies. So if it is a need-based scholarship, grant, let me word it that way, it is based on the information that you provide to the school on the various financial aid applications that they require that you submit. So many schools will require you first to do what we call the FAFSA application. That's what we talked about a few slides back. And they want you to do that. Then other schools may have the FAFSA application, and they may have what we call an institutional application as well. The institutional application is that very thing. It is designed by the school. It is their questions. So if you want to have access to their dollars, you are obligated to respond to all of the questions that are on there. So for example, I have an institutional form at the school that I currently work at, and it's pretty in depth. And because key thing is we're trying to make sure that there's a fairness in the application process. So we ask every student the same question, who wants access to these institutional dollars. And we have to do what we call some kind of analysis. So we look at the data, we run it through some kind of analysis, and then we assess what we believe is the amount they're eligible for. So many schools have a grid in the background. This is not public information, where they kind of see where you fall on that grid to determine the dollar amounts that you're going to get. And so that's institutional dollars. In the space of merit dollars from the school, you have to, again, based on the school's criteria. So a lot of times for many of my seniors who are already, when you went on college tours or you were inquiring with various schools, some of them were dangling these, what we call recruitment dollars. And so they usually will go to students who have high test scores, high GPA scores. Sometimes because if they are trying to increase their diversity pool, they may give merit based on your ethnicity, your background, your religion, your gender. All of these things are what we call merit dollars. And sometimes there's a combination of merit and need-based. So you can be the student who has a 4.0, but you fall in a what we call low economic background. So if you fall in a disadvantaged background, you may be eligible for that kind of hybrid scholarship because they probably have plenty of students who are extremely high achievers. However, many of them may not fall in a lower economic background. So that's sometimes what they may offer. And so those typically does not require an additional application. It is your admissions application that they make that decision. So if you had to fill out a college application and you put in all your demographics information, and sometime on the college application, there's a section for a bio. And that's where you kind of tell your story, whatever your situation is. And it's based on that application where they then partner with other information, your test scores, things of that nature. They'll make the assessment in that space to say, okay, you get a merit dollar. And those tend to be what sometimes you hear is called presidential. And presidential is usually the top of the line type of merit scholarship because it's usually covered tuition, 100% of the tuition. And there are far and few between. So a few schools may have a few of those and they give it to maybe their top 3 students. There may be scholarships that's specific to your major. So that department, so let's say you are a communication major and that's the division, that's the program you apply to. So they may have their department scholarship that you also may be eligible for. And also that happens in the merit space. So that's generally what happens at the school level. And so if you are able and fortunate enough to get one of those merit scholarships early on, then that kind of sets the trend for other scholarship dollars that you also may need to look for. So again, you're applying for school, they'll let you know up front that you got it. That you got the merit dollars. It comes with your acceptance letter. It'll usually say, for some of you on the phone on this Zoom, probably already got one. It says, congratulations, welcome. We're looking forward to seeing you here. And we want to offer you this $10,000 scholarship. In the language in that letter, that's key, will tell you if this is a one-time offer or is a continuing offer. It's got to be spelled out in that letter, because if it doesn't, then you want to call the school and say, hey, just don't assume it's a one-time. Like, is this happening on a year-to-year basis? And then they'll say, oh, yes. And then you want to get that in writing. If they say no, then you know what it is. And then you plan accordingly.
Okay, so elaboration.
Yeah.
So that's when the scholarship is through the school directly. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What happened with scholarships outside of the school? So like specific appeal, scholarships with a specific appeal. So for track or something that you may find, and how do you go about searching for those? How do you, do you get that same type of letter?
Yeah, so there's the institutional and then there's the external. So the institutional, yes, you get a letter from the school, be it from the admissions team. If it's need-based, it'll come from the financial aid office. If you got and so that doesn't matter, even if it was a sports scholarship or a major, if you were like in a particular major, all of those letters will come specifically from the admissions team because they usually are awarded in the front end. And so if you were on a track team, as you suggested, the track team would make their evaluation and say, yes, we want to offer this particular student a 4-year scholarship. And so they will give that information to the admissions team, and the admissions team will send the letter and say, congratulations, you got accepted into our track program, and we're going to give you $20,000 a year. So yeah, it's that kind of communication. External scholarships are a little different because the communication is coming out, obviously outside of the school. It's something the student has taken action on. The student has applied for it themselves, or someone had applied for it on behalf of the student. And so when the student gets accepted of those dollars, they will receive some type of communication saying, congratulations, you've been awarded X dollars. And in that same letter, it will spell out what the terms of that scholarship is. It will even say how they're going to disperse the money to you. They would say it's either going to go directly to your school, or they may put the money directly in your hand. Once you get that communication, you want to let your school know that you have these dollars coming. So what schools will typically do, once you share with them that you're getting these external opportunity scholarships, they will make a notation on your account. So even though your balance may not be paid in full, there may be a pending amount on your bill because those dollars will be coming down the line. And so you want to let your school know. Now, if the money's coming directly to you, you need to use it for what it's for. And so the school may not be aware that you've gotten this external scholarship because it doesn't necessarily require you to report that information to us. However, you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have an outstanding balance and you spent the money on something else. So that's what that looks like. So to your question, searching. So there are a lot of different scholarship search engines out there. Some are good, some are not so good. The common one that many of you probably have seen is FastWeb. And I like it because it's kind of clean and straightforward. They definitely had done some upgrades on the website. I was on it the other day, and it's pretty straightforward. It kind of has literally a database of scholarships from everywhere with dates, requirements, and things of that nature. So I would say for many students, start there. In addition to that, you want to talk to, for my parents on a call, I would suggest that you check with your employer to see if they're offering some type of tuition reimbursement program. I know one place I worked at, they had, the employer had consortium agreements with various schools in the New York State area. And so if I had a dependent who went to one of those schools, even though we weren't employees of that school, they were able to go tuition free. So you may have such a benefit. I know NYU is huge on that. So if there are any NYU employees, you already know if your kid is at NYU, he's able to go for free. I think Cornell is another school that does that. I think there's a few schools that do that. And then you want to do, as I said earlier, you want to check your local organizations. That would be your church, your nonprofit organizations, your local small businesses. Many of these places, they know you, you're part of their community, and they look forward to funding, young, aspiring students like yourself, and they're right there. And so you definitely want to check in with them. And I would say, as you collect all the various information, you go back to your organizer. I can share the screen back with you. You go back to your organizer and just start making notes and who you need to follow up with in that space. And I think if you do that, you truly will see how successful you are in this space. So you can go back to the last slide. Yes. So on that note, we're going to wrap this up. You can email me at L Walker at omimi-associates.com. Follow me on Instagram at Fene911. And we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.
One last question.
Yes.
What is the season around searching for scholarships? When should you start looking for them? So as a student thinking about going to college or your senior year, what is the time? When should you start?
So I would say ideally what you want to do is start around your late junior year, kind of just getting familiar with the process, kind of like a muscle exercise. So then by your senior year, around October is when you start to just dig deep. Because at that point, the FAFSA application, which is the federal application, opens up October 1st. So at that time, you're also putting in your college applications in around October, November, if you want an early assurance or early acceptance letters. So around October as a senior is when I would say hit the ground running and don't stop. Even when you get your award letters from the various colleges that accepted you, keep looking, because end game is to close the gap. Because once all this aid is applied, there's still this out-of-pocket difference. And so if you don't have to take out loans to cover it, or mom and dad, you guys don't need to, pull from your retirement fund to fund this, you want to keep looking for scholarships. And not only once you get into college, but even during college. Because again, what typically happens once you get into the school, you're like, I'm over it, and you move on. Keep looking, and then hold your school accountable. Thanks for that question, Great question. Hold your school accountable, because any really good financial aid office is also generating a database of external scholarship opportunities. And so they usually keep that information on their website, or they have it in their office. And so you want to check in with them every so often to say, hey, any new scholarship opportunities came in, please bring it to my attention.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
Many thanks. This has been awesome. Any final words that you want to close with to students, parents?
Yeah, no, again, stay safe in this crazy time. I think, as I said, we got another series coming up next Wednesday. COVID impact on financial aid, I think, is really, really important, because many schools are being impacted in their endowment spaces, and it's going to be a game changer for many students who were relying on these dollars. And so I encourage you to come back. I ask that you reach out to me on the various platforms, Instagram, or email me if you have questions going forward. And I wish you all the very best. Have a great night. Thanks, my producer.
Awesome. You're more than welcome. Thank you.